Keth Voren had heard stories about humans his entire life. His teachers called them reckless. His military trainers called them unstable. His own mother, before he left for the war, had touched his face with her lower hands and whispered, "Stay away from the humans, my child. They break everything they touch, including themselves." So when Keth Voren walked onto the human vessel starward bound for the first time, he expected chaos. He expected noise and violence and the smell of danger. What he found instead was a woman with brown hair tied back in a simple knot, sitting at a table and eating something that looked like processed grain mixed with dried fruit. "You must be the new medic," she said without looking up. "I'm Grace. Grab a seat. We leave in 20 minutes. Keth Voren stood there, all four of his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides. His scales, normally a calm blue-green, flickered with nervous yellow. "Lieutenant Murphy?" he asked. "Just Grace when we're not in combat." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were tired but kind. "You're Velocian, right? Medical Corps? We lost our last medic on the Dreth border. Plasma burn. Quick death, at least." She said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, as if death was just another thing that happened, like weather or mechanical failure. "I am honored to serve," Keth Voren said, because he did not know what else to say. Grace smiled, and it changed her whole face. "Don't be honored yet. Wait until you've met Cole." Cole Bennett turned out to be the largest human Keth Voren had ever seen. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, with shoulders like a cargo loader, and hands that could crush a Velocian skull without effort. He was cleaning a weapon that looked far too large for any sensible person to carry, and he grunted when Keth Voren entered the armory. "New medic," Cole said. It was not a question. "I am Keth Voren. I trained at the Central Medical Academy on Veloce Prime and completed my combat certification with—" "Can you stop bleeding?" Keth Voren blinked. "Yes." "Can you work while people are shooting at you?" I have trained for such situations." Cole looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they held something Keth Voren could not name. "Training's not the same as doing. But you'll learn." He went back to cleaning his weapon. "Or you won't. Either way, welcome aboard." The third human Keth Voren met was Lucy Tran, and she was the opposite of everything he expected. She was small, barely reaching his shoulder, with quick movements and a smile that appeared and disappeared like lightning. She found him in the medical bay, unpacking his supplies with careful precision. "Oh good, you organize things," she said, appearing in the doorway so suddenly that Keth Voren nearly dropped a container of wound sealant. "The last medic just threw everything in boxes. Took forever to find anything." "Organization saves lives," Keth Voren said, a phrase his instructors had repeated constantly. Lucy laughed. It was a bright sound, unexpected in a warship. "That's what they tell you in school. In the field, sometimes you just grab whatever's closest and hope for the best." She tilted her head, studying him. "You've got nice scales. Do they always change color like that?" Keth Voren realized his scales had shifted to embarrassed purple. "They reflect my emotional state. It is difficult to hide." "That's actually great," Lucy said. "Humans are terrible at reading each other. At least with you, we'll know when you're scared." She grinned. "We're all scared. We just hide it better." The rest of the crew filled in around him over the next few days. Drosik, the Morthian engineer, had 8 legs and a permanent expression of doom. He calculated survival odds constantly and shared them with anyone who would listen. Urel, the Fenari communications officer, had beautiful feathers that trembled whenever he was nervous, which was always. But it was the humans who fascinated Keth Voren. He watched them when they did not know he was watching. He saw Grace reading reports late into the night, dark circles under her eyes, pushing herself past any reasonable limit. He saw Cole exercising in the cargo bay, lifting weights that would crush most species, his face blank and focused. He saw Lucy playing a game on her personal device, laughing at something only she found funny, completely relaxed, even though they were heading into a war zone. They slept so little. They ate strange foods at strange hours. They made jokes about death. Cole and Grace once spent an entire meal discussing the worst ways they had seen people die, and Lucy added commentary, and all three of them laughed. Keth Voron had felt sick. Drossik had left the room. "Why do they do that?" Yrel asked one night, his feathers flat with distress. "Why do they laugh about terrible things?" Keth Voron had no answer. He simply recorded his observations in his personal log, trying to understand creatures that seemed designed to confuse him. The mission briefing came on the 5th day. Grace gathered everyone in the small tactical room, her face serious, all traces of casual warmth gone. "We're hitting a Dreth listening post," she said, pointing at a hollow display showing a chunk of rock floating in space. "It's supposed to be abandoned. The Dreth pulled out 3 weeks ago during their retreat. Our job is to clear it, confirm it's empty, and download any intelligence they left behind." "Supposed to be abandoned," Cole repeated. But command is getting strange readings. Could be equipment malfunction, could be wildlife, could be nothing." Grace paused. "Or it could be something else." Drossik's legs clicked nervously. "What kind of strange readings?" "Life signs that don't match any known species in the database." Grace looked at each of them in turn. "Probably a sensor glitch. But we go in careful. We go in together, and if things get bad, we get out. Understood?" Everyone nodded. Keth Voron noticed that the humans seemed almost eager, their eyes bright, their bodies leaning forward. They wanted this. They wanted to walk into unknown danger. He would never understand them. The transport dropped toward the asteroid, its engines humming. Through the viewport, Keth Voron watched the listening post grow larger, a structure of metal and shadow half buried in gray rock. 2 minutes, Grace announced. Her voice was calm, perfectly calm. Cole checked his weapon one final time. Lucy stretched like a hunting animal preparing to pounce. Even Yrel seemed to steady himself, his feathers lying flat. And then Yrel made a sound, a soft chirp of alarm, staring at his communication screen. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice trembling. "The life signs, they just multiplied. There are dozens of them now, and they're moving. They're moving toward the entry point." Grace did not hesitate. "Then we move faster. Everyone ready?" The transport door opened onto darkness. Keth Voron stepped into the unknown, surrounded by humans, wondering if his mother had been right all along. The listening post smelled wrong. Keth Voron knew this the moment he stepped inside. His species had sensitive olfactory glands, and what he detected was not the stale air of an abandoned station. It was something older, something that reminded him of deep caves and rotting vegetation and fear itself. "Lights are down," Cole muttered, switching on the beam attached to his weapon. The light cut through the darkness, revealing metal walls covered in strange patterns. At first, Keth Voron thought it was damage from battle. Then he looked closer. The patterns were organic. Black tendrils spread across the walls like veins, pulsing faintly with a light that hurt to look at directly. "What is that?" Lucy whispered. She had drawn her sidearm, her usual playfulness completely gone. "Unknown biological material," Yrel reported, his voice cracking. "I am not detecting any match in our databases. It is not Dreth. It is not anything recorded." Grace moved forward slowly, her weapon raised. "Stay together. Watch every angle. Cole, take rear guard." They walked deeper into the station, and with every step, the wrongness grew worse. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor felt soft in places, as if something had grown over the metal. And everywhere, Those black tendrils spread like a disease. They found the first Drek soldier around the second corner. Kethvoron had seen death before. His training had included exposure to combat casualties, to prepare him for the reality of war. But nothing had prepared him for this. The Dreth was fused to the wall, not leaning against it, not trapped by it, but merged with it. The black tendrils had grown through its body, threading through its scales, wrapping around its limbs. Its eyes were still open, staring at nothing, and its mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Yrel made a choking sound. Drossik's 8 legs locked in place, refusing to move. Even Cole, massive and steady Cole, exhaled slowly through his nose. But Grace just looked at it for a long moment, then said, "It did not die fast. We need to move." "Move?" Drossik's voice was high and thin. "Move where? The survival odds for this mission are now approaching 0. We should retreat immediately." "We don't know what we're dealing with yet," Grace said. "We need information." "We are dealing with something that absorbs living creatures." Drossik's legs clicked frantically. "What more information do we need?" Grace turned to face him, and her expression was strange. It was not fear, though fear would have been reasonable. It was something harder, something determined. "We need to know if it can spread. We need to know if it's already off this rock. And we need to know how to kill it." Dozens of Dreth soldiers, all fused to walls and floors and ceilings, all frozen in expressions of horror. Some of them seemed to have been running. Others had been fighting. None of them had survived. The black tendrils grew thicker as they went deeper, forming patterns that almost looked like writing. Kethvoron's translator could not identify the language. He was not sure it was a language at all. "There," Lucy said, pointing. "Control room. Might have logs." The control room was almost untouched by the growth, as if something had kept it clean deliberately. Grace nodded at Yrel, who approached the main console with trembling feathers and began searching through the Dreth files. "Here," Yrel said after a moment, "audio logs. The last one was recorded 12 days ago." The recording played. A Dreth voice, speaking in fast, panicked sentences that the translator rendered with flat affect. "An ancient structure. We thought it was a relic from the old ones. Commander Vresh ordered excavation. We should never have dug. It woke up. It is not a thing. It is a presence. It speaks in our minds. It offers us eternity. Some of the crew are listening. Some of them are walking down to join it willingly. I can feel it reaching for me. I can feel it promising things. Beautiful, terrible things. If anyone receives this message, do not come here. Do not." The log ended in static. "An entity," Grace said quietly. "Something alive, something intelligent." Before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. The black tendrils on the walls pulsed brighter, and a voice spoke. It did not come from the speakers. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from inside their skulls, bypassing their ears entirely. It was not one voice, but thousands, layered on top of each other, speaking in harmony. "You came. We have been waiting. We are so lonely. We have been lonely for so long." Kethvoron felt his scales flash white with pure terror. He could not move. He could not think. The voice filled every part of him, pressing against his consciousness like water flooding a room. Lucy stumbled, clutching her head. Drossik collapsed entirely, his legs folding beneath him. Yrel screamed, his feathers standing straight up. But the humans did not fall. Grace gritted her teeth and raised her weapon, aiming at nothing. Cole planted his feet and growled, actually growled like a primitive animal defending territory. Lucy, even while clutching her head, pulled a blade from her belt with her free hand. "Why do you resist? We offer you everything. Knowledge, peace, freedom from death. Join us, become us. You will never be alone again." "Shut up," Grace said. Her voice was strained but clear. "Team, We are leaving, now. Cole, take point. Lucy, grab Drossik. Keth Voron, help Yarel. Moving felt impossible. The voice pressed harder, showing Keth Voron visions. His homeworld burning, his family dying, endless darkness consuming everything he loved. Then a hand grabbed his arm. Lucy's hand, small but surprisingly strong. Move your feet, she said. One step at a time. Don't think, just move. He moved. They ran through corridors that seemed to twist around them. The black tendrils reached out from walls, grasping at their legs. Cole fired his weapon, and the energy blasts burned through the organic matter, but it grew back within seconds. The entity's voice shifted, becoming angry, becoming hungry. You cannot leave. You belong to us now. You will join the others. You will become part of something greater. Keep running, Grace shouted. They burst through the entry point and into their transport. Cole slammed the door closed, just as tendrils slammed against it from outside, leaving black smears on the metal. Go! Grace screamed at the pilot. Go now! The transport lifted off, pulling away from the asteroid. Through the viewport, Keth Voron watched the listening post recede into darkness. And he saw something else. Something moving on the surface of the rock. A shape that should not exist, made of angles and shadows that hurt his eyes to perceive. It was watching them. We will wait, the voice whispered, fainter now but still present. We have waited so long. We can wait longer. You will return. They always return. The connection broke. The voice vanished. And Keth Voron found himself sitting on the floor of the transport, his scales cycling through every color of fear, surrounded by creatures he had thought were reckless and unstable. The humans were breathing hard. Lucy's nose was bleeding. Grace's hands were shaking. Cole was staring at nothing, his jaw clenched tight. But they were alive. They were all alive. What was that? Keth Voron finally managed to ask. Grace looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something ancient, something that had faced darkness before and survived. I don't know, she admitted, but we're going to find out, and then we're going to kill it. The way she said it, Keth Voron almost believed her. They did not go back to the main fleet. Grace made the decision quickly, without consultation, and nobody argued. Instead, the transport docked with a small supply station at the edge of the system, far from any other ships. They needed time to recover. They needed time to think. Keth Voron treated the wounded in the cramped medical bay. Lucy's nose had stopped bleeding, but she had burst vessels in her eyes from the mental pressure. Drossik remained unconscious for 3 hours, and when he woke, he refused to speak. Yarel's feathers had turned gray, a sign of deep psychological shock in Fenari. The humans refused treatment. I'm fine, Grace said when Keth Voron approached her with his scanner. She was sitting alone in the corner of the cargo bay, staring at a spot on the floor. Her hands had stopped shaking, but something in her eyes had not settled. Lieutenant, your neural scans show elevated stress hormones. Your body is preparing for a threat that no longer exists. I can administer. I said I'm fine. Her voice was hard, a wall going up. Then she seemed to catch herself, and her expression softened slightly. Sorry, I need to sit with it for a while. Humans process fear differently. Keth Voron sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. His scales had finally returned to their normal blue-green, though flickers of anxious yellow still passed through occasionally. How, he asked. How do you process something like that? Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if she was reciting something from memory. My grandmother used to tell me stories about our homeworld, Earth. She said humans evolved surrounded by predators. Everything wanted to eat us. Big cats, wolves, snakes, disease. We were small and soft and weak. We should have gone extinct 100 times over. But you survived. We survived, because we learned to be afraid. Grace finally looked at him. Fear is not a weakness for us, Kethvorin. It is our oldest tool. It kept us alive when we had no claws, no scales, no venom. We feel fear deeply, but we also know how to carry it, how to walk beside it instead of running from it. That thing in the station, Kethvorin said slowly, it tried to break us with fear. I felt it pushing into my mind, showing me terrible things. I wanted to surrender just to make it stop. I know. I felt it too. But you kept moving. All three of you kept moving. Grace smiled, but it was a sad smile, weighted with something Kethvorin did not fully understand. Because we have practice. Humans have faced our own monsters, wars that killed millions, plagues that wiped out half our populations. We almost destroyed our own planet more than once. Every generation, we find new ways to terrify ourselves. She paused. That thing down there was ancient and powerful, but it was not the first horror we have ever met. Later, Kethvorin found Cole in the maintenance corridor, checking his weapon for the 100th time. The big human looked up when Kethvorin approached, but did not stop working. "How do you do it?" Kethvorin asked. "How do you stay so calm?" Cole snorted. "Calm? I was terrified down there. Still am if I think about it too long." "You did not show it." "Course I didn't show it. That's the job." Cole set down his weapon and looked at Kethvorin with those pale, steady eyes. "Listen, Lizard, fear's not the problem. Fear is useful. Fear tells you something's dangerous. The problem is when fear makes you freeze, makes you stupid. So you train yourself to move anyway. You make it automatic. Your legs shake, your hands sweat, your heart pounds like it's trying to escape your chest. But you move anyway." "But how?" Cole shrugged. "You find something worth moving for, something stronger than the fear." He picked up his weapon again. "For me, it's them. Grace, Lucy, even you and the bird and the spider, my squad. I can't protect them if I'm curled up in a ball somewhere, so I don't curl up." Lucy found Kethvorin last. She was sitting on the edge of an open airlock, her legs dangling into space, held in place only by a thin safety tether. The stars spread out before her like scattered diamonds. Kethvorin approached cautiously, alarmed by her position. "This seems dangerous," he said. "Probably." Lucy did not turn around. "But it's beautiful, right? All those stars, all those worlds. Makes you feel small." "Is that comforting?" Lucy laughed, and it was almost her normal laugh, but not quite. "Kind of. That thing down there, it wanted us to feel small, wanted us to feel helpless. But we already know we're small. Humans have always known. We look up at the sky and see infinity, and we feel tiny, and then we build rockets and fly into it anyway." Kethvorin sat down beside her, carefully securing his own tether. "You laugh about terrible things. You joke about death. I do not understand it." "Yeah, well, we don't either sometimes." Lucy finally looked at him, and her burst blood vessels made her eyes look strange, almost alien. "Laughing helps. When things get bad, really bad, laughing is how we remind ourselves we're still alive, still human. If we can make a joke, we can still think. If we can still think, we can still fight. And if you cannot laugh..." Lucy's expression grew serious. "Then we cry. Then we scream. Then we do whatever we have to do to let it out. Humans don't bury fear. We process it. Sometimes that looks crazy from the outside, but it keeps us moving." The team gathered in the small briefing room 6 hours later. Drossik had finally spoken, though his voice was weak. Urel's feathers had regained some color. Even Kethvorin felt more stable, though the memory of that voice still echoed in his thoughts. Grace stood at the front, a hollow display showing the asteroid behind her. "We have two choices," she said. "We can report back to Fleet Command, Tell them what we found, and let someone else handle it. That seems wise, Drossik muttered. Or, Grace continued, we can go back. We know the entity exists, we know where it is, and we know something important. It cannot control humans easily. Our minds are too chaotic for it to get a solid grip. We might be the only team in the galaxy that can face this thing and win. Win how? Yrel asked. We do not even know what it is. The Dreth logs mentioned it came from beneath the asteroid. The listening post has a power core. If we overload that core, we collapse the section above the entity's location. Bury it under a few million tons of rock. That will not kill it, Kethvorin said quietly. No, but it will trap it. Give us time to find a permanent solution. Grace looked at each of them in turn. I will not order anyone to come. This is a volunteer mission. If you want to stay here and wait for extraction, I understand. The room fell silent. Kethvorin watched the humans. Cole was nodding slowly, already committed. Lucy was stretching her fingers, preparing for action. Grace stood steady, waiting. They were going back. Of course they were going back. They had stared into the abyss and survived, and now they meant to stare into it again. Kethvorin thought about his mother's warning. Stay away from the humans. They break everything they touch. But maybe breaking was not always bad. Maybe some things needed to be broken. I will go, he said. His voice surprised him with its steadiness. Where you go, I go. Drossik clicked his legs nervously. Yrel's feathers trembled, but slowly, reluctantly, they both nodded. Then we're all going, Grace said. Get some rest. We drop in 4 hours. Kethvorin did not rest. Instead, he sat in the dark and thought about fear, about humans, about ancient things that waited in the shadows. And for the first time since he had come aboard the Starward Bound, he felt something besides terror. The listening post was worse than before. The black tendrils had spread everywhere now, covering every surface, pulsing with that sick light that made Kethvorin's eyes ache. The walls breathed. The floor shifted. Reality itself felt thin, as if they were walking through a dream that could become a nightmare at any moment. Grace led them down, past the control room, past the fused bodies of the Dreth soldiers, into corridors they had not explored before. Cole kept his weapon ready. Lucy moved like a shadow. Drossik's 8 legs clicked softly on the organic growth covering the floor. Yrel stayed in the center of the group, his feathers flat with terror, but his talons steady on his equipment. Kethvorin felt the entity before he heard it, a pressure in his skull, gentle at first, then growing. It was watching them. It knew they had returned. You came back, the voice whispered in their minds. We knew you would. We have been so lonely. You will stay with us forever now. Ignore it, Grace said through gritted teeth. Keep moving. The corridors twisted in ways that made no sense. They would walk straight forward and end up facing sideways. They would descend stairs and find themselves higher than before. The entity was playing with space itself, warping the station around them. This is impossible, Drossik said, his voice thin. According to my calculations, we have walked 3 kilometers. The station is only 800 meters across. It's in our heads, Lucy said. It's making us see things, making us feel lost. Then how do we know we are going the right way? Yrel asked. Cole pointed at the walls. The black tendrils were thicker here, flowing downward like rivers of darkness. Follow the growth. It leads to the source. They followed. The entity grew bolder as they descended. It stopped whispering and started showing them things. Memories twisted into nightmares. Kethvorin saw his homeworld burning. He saw his clutchmates screaming as darkness swallowed them. He saw his mother reaching for him, begging him to help, and he was frozen, unable to move, watching her dissolve into nothing. He stumbled. His scales flashed through every shade of anguish. A hand grabbed his shoulder. Cole's hand, firm and grounding. "Not real," Cole said. "Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. Focus on me. Focus on my voice." Kethvaron forced himself to look at the human's face. Cole's eyes were red, wet with tears he was refusing to let fall. The entity was attacking him too, but he kept moving anyway. They all kept moving. Lucy was muttering to herself, a constant stream of words that Kethvaron could barely hear. "Not real. Not real. I'm here. I'm alive. Just keep walking. Not real." Her hands were shaking, but her steps were steady. Grace said nothing. Her jaw was clenched so tight that Kethvaron could see the muscles standing out in her neck. Whatever the entity was showing her, she was enduring it through pure will. Drossik's legs were moving mechanically, but his eyes were glazed. Kethvaron reached out and steadied him, keeping him on the path. Yrel made a sound, a soft keen of distress. "I cannot," he said. "I cannot continue. It is too much." Grace stopped. She turned around, walked back to Yrel, and took his feathered face in both hands. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were fierce. "You are Yrel of the Fenari," she said. "You are a communications officer in the United Galactic Coalition. You have family who are waiting for you to come home. You are afraid, and that is okay. Fear means you are paying attention. But you are not alone. You are with us, and we do not leave anyone behind." His feathers slowly began to settle. "Can you take one more step?" Grace asked. Yrel hesitated. Then he nodded. "Good. Then take that step. And then take another. That's all we need." They continued. The power core was at the heart of the station, buried deep beneath layers of rock and metal. They found it behind a massive door that had been ripped open by the black tendrils. Beyond the door, the growth was everywhere, forming shapes that almost looked like figures, like bodies frozen mid-step. And at the center of it all, the entity waited. It was not a creature in any traditional sense. It had no fixed form. Kethvaron saw angles and curves and shapes that his mind could not process. It shifted constantly, flowing like liquid, folding in on itself, existing in dimensions that should not exist. Looking away was somehow worse. "You have come so far," the entity said, and now its voice was everywhere, pressing against them from all sides. "We are impressed. Most species break long before they reach us. But you humans, you are different. You contain such chaos, such beautiful, terrible chaos. We want to understand you. We want to consume you." "Sorry," Grace said. "We're not on the menu." She raised her weapon and fired. The energy blast struck the entity, and for a moment it recoiled. Then it laughed, a sound that echoed in dimensions beyond hearing. "You cannot harm us with your toys. We are ancient. We were old when your species was still crawling in the mud of your birth world. We have consumed civilizations. We have drunk the minds of gods." "Yeah?" Cole raised his own weapon. "Well, we killed our gods. What makes you think you're any different?" He fired. Lucy fired. Even Yrel, trembling so hard his feathers were falling out, raised his sidearm and fired. The entity screamed, not in pain, but in surprise. The chaos of human minds was disrupting its focus. Every shot carried intention, will, defiance, things it could not understand, things it could not control. Grace turned to Kethvaron. "The power core. Can you overload it?" Kethvaron looked at the massive cylinder in the center of the room, wrapped in black tendrils but still operational. "I am a medic, not an engineer." "Drossik." The Morthian was still partially frozen, but something in Grace's voice snapped him back. Yes, I can do it. I need 3 minutes." "Then you have 2. Grace turned back to the entity. "Cole, Lucy, hold the line. Whatever happens, do not let it reach Drossik." The entity attacked. It was not a physical attack. It was a wave of pure psychic energy, crashing against their minds like an ocean against a cliff. Keth Voren felt himself drowning in images of death, of loss, of endless darkness. He saw himself alone, abandoned, forgotten. He saw the universe ending, and nothing left but silence. But beside him, he heard voices, human voices. Cole was cursing, every foul word in his vocabulary, a constant stream of defiance. Lucy was laughing, that bright laugh of hers, broken and hysterical, but still alive. Grace was speaking, calm and steady, guiding them. Hold on, just a little longer. Drossik's legs were moving across the control panel, 8 limbs working in perfect coordination despite his terror. And Keth Voren found himself moving too. He positioned himself beside Yrel, supporting the Fenari, keeping him upright. He was a medic. His job was to keep people alive, and that was what he would do. The entity reached for Grace. Tendrils of darkness wrapped around her arm, her shoulder, her neck. They tried to pull her into the mass, to absorb her into the endless hole. But Grace did not stop fighting. She grabbed a tendril with her bare hand and pulled, tearing it from her own flesh, leaving burns that shimmered with wrong light. "You want to know why humans are different?" she said, blood running down her arm. "Because we know we're going to die. Every single one of us, we're born dying, and we spend our whole lives fighting against it. Not because we think we can win, but because the fight is all we have. The fight is what makes us human." The entity hesitated. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across its countless forms. "Core is ready," Drossik shouted. Grace smiled, wild and fierce. "Run." They ran. Behind them the power core began to overload. Behind them the entity screamed in genuine rage. Behind them the station started to collapse. He just ran, surrounded by humans, fighting for survival. Fighting beside humans, he discovered, was the most terrifying thing he had ever done. And also the most alive he had ever felt. The explosion tore the asteroid apart. Keth Voren watched through the transport's viewport as millions of tons of rock collapsed inward, burying the listening post, burying the ancient structure beneath it, burying the entity that had waited there for centuries beyond counting. Fire blossomed in the vacuum, silent and beautiful, and then faded into darkness. The transport was already pulling away, engines screaming at maximum power. The shockwave caught them anyway, sending the small ship spinning. Keth Voren was thrown against the wall, his forearms scrambling for purchase. Around him, alarms wailed and lights flickered. The spinning stopped. The alarms went quiet, and there was silence. Cole was the first to speak. "Is everyone alive?" Voices answered him, one by one. Lucy, breathless but laughing. Drossik, complaining about damage to his carapace. Grace, coughing, her voice raw. And Keth Voren, his scales cycling through relief and exhaustion and something that felt almost like triumph. "We made it," he said. The words sounded strange, impossible. "We made it," Grace confirmed. She pulled herself into a sitting position, wincing at the burns on her arm. The wrong light had faded from them, leaving ordinary wounds. Painful but normal, healable. "Is the entity dead?" Keth Voren looked at the debris field where the asteroid had been. Deep within the tumbling rocks, he could sense something. A whisper at the edge of his thoughts, faint and distant. "No," he said, "but it is trapped, buried under all that stone. It will take it years to dig out. Decades, maybe longer." "Good enough." Grace leaned her head back against the wall. "Gives us time to find a permanent solution. Report back to command. Get some real firepower out here. Maybe even figure out what the thing actually is." Lucy was sitting beside Cole, her head resting on his massive shoulder. Blood had dried on her face from her nosebleed, and her burst blood vessels were still visible in her eyes. but she was smiling. "Hey, Kethvoran," she said. "How are your scales doing?" Kethvoran looked down at himself. His scales had settled into a color he had never seen before on himself. It was not quite blue, not quite green, not quite any emotion he could name. It was something new, something forged in terror and tempered by survival. "I do not know what color this is," he admitted. "Looks like courage to me," Cole said. It was the first kind thing the big human had ever said to him. They docked with the Starward Bound 3 hours later. The medical bay became a scene of organized chaos as Kethvoran treated everyone's wounds. Burns, bruises, minor fractures. Lucy had cracked a rib during their escape. Drossik had lost feeling in 2 of his legs temporarily. Yrel's feathers were falling out from stress, leaving bare patches on his arms. And Grace? Grace had been touched by the entity, marked by it. Kethvoran examined her arm carefully, his instruments showing damage that went beyond the physical. The entity had tried to merge with her, to absorb her consciousness. It had failed, but traces remained, scars that would never fully heal. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, watching him work. "I do not know," Kethvoran said honestly. "I have never seen anything like this. You should be examined by specialists when we return to the fleet." "But your guess?" "My guess is that you are still you. The entity could not hold on to your mind. You were too chaotic, too contradictory. It could not find a solid piece of you to grip." Grace laughed softly. "That sounds about right." Later, when the others were resting, Drossik approached Kethvoran in the medical bay. The Morthian moved stiffly, still recovering from his physical and mental trauma. "I have a question," Drossik said. "Ask." "How did they do it?" Drossik's legs clicked in agitation. "The humans. That entity was ancient, powerful beyond comprehension. My calculations showed 0% survival probability. Yet they kept fighting. They did not freeze. They did not surrender. They fought something that should be impossible to fight." Kethvoran thought about everything he had seen, the way Cole kept moving, even as tears streamed down his face, the way Lucy laughed in the face of cosmic horror, the way Grace tore free from the entity's grip through sheer force of will. "I asked them the same question," he said, "and they told me that fear is their oldest companion. They have lived with it for thousands of years. It is not their enemy. It is their tool. They do not try to eliminate fear. They learn to carry it with them." "That is insane." "Yes, but it works." Drossik was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Perhaps there is wisdom in insanity." Yrel recovered slowly over the following days. His feathers grew back, though they were slightly different colors than before. Kethvoran suspected they always would be. "I transmitted a warning," Yrel told him one evening. "During our escape, I sent the station's coordinates and all the data we had gathered to Coalition Command. Even if we had not survived, someone would know about the entity." That was brave. Yrel's feathers fluttered with embarrassment. "It was necessary. The humans taught me that. Sometimes you do things not because you are brave, but because they must be done." The Starward Bound was a week away from Fleet Command when Grace called Kethvoran to recorders. She was sitting at her desk, writing reports, looking tired but peaceful. "You did well," she said. "On the station. You kept your head. You helped Yrel when he was breaking. You stayed when you could have run." Kethvoran's scales flickered with humble purple. "I simply did my duty." "No, you did more than your duty." Grace stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. "I've served with a lot of different species. Most of them are terrified of humans. They think we're unstable, unpredictable, dangerous. Are you not?" Grace smiled. "Maybe, but we're also something else. We're adaptable. We face the darkness and find ways to survive. And we bring others with us." She turned to face him. "You're different now, Kethvoran. That color your scales have been showing, that's the color of someone who has looked into the abyss and refused to blink. You're one of us now. One of you, someone who carries fear but keeps walking anyway. Kefferon thought about his mother's warning. Stay away from the humans. They break everything they touch. But she had been wrong. The humans had not broken him. They had forged him. He sat down that night to record his final log about the mission. His translator hummed softly as he spoke into his personal recorder. I came aboard this ship expecting to find chaos, he said. I expected recklessness and instability and violence. And I found all of those things. But I also found something else. I found courage that comes not from the absence of fear, but from the mastery of it. I found strength that comes not from being unbreakable, but from being willing to break and heal again. He paused, watching his scales shift through colors he was still learning to name. I have fought beside humans now. I have seen terror beyond anything I could have imagined. I have felt an ancient being try to consume my mind. And I have learned that the most frightening thing in this universe is not the entity that waits in the darkness. It is not the void between stars. It is not death itself. His scales settled into that new color, the one Cole had called courage. The most frightening thing in this universe is a human who refuses to stop, who looks at impossible odds and says, not today, who carries their fear like a weapon and their hope like a shield. He thought about Grace, burned but unbroken, about Cole, weeping but fighting, about Lucy, laughing in the face of oblivion. I was warned to stay away from humans. I was told they would destroy everything they touched. But I have learned the truth. Humans do not destroy. They transform. They take terror and turn it into defiance. They take despair and forge it into determination. He smiled, an expression he had learned from watching Lucy. I am honored to have fought beside them, and whatever darkness waits in the future, I know one thing for certain. I would rather face it with humans at my side than face anything alone. The recording ended. The ship flew on through the stars, and somewhere far behind them, buried under millions of tons of rock, an ancient entity stirred and wondered at the strange, chaotic, beautiful creatures that had refused to be afraid. Or rather, that had been afraid and had kept fighting anyway. It did not understand. Perhaps it never would. But somewhere deep in its endless consciousness, for the first time in eons, it felt something new. It felt respect.